What comes to your mind when you hear the word British? What does the word British mean?
The Union Jack is certainly one of the most readily recognisable badges of Britain, and it was not always the three crosses we see in it today. At its heart is a red cross on a white background, the Cross of St. George, which comes originally from the Middle East and has religious associations for both Christians and Muslims in Jerusalem. Probably as a direct result of his experiences during the Crusades, Richard I, Richard Coeur de Lion, adopted it as the English flag in 1189. 100 years later, Edward I, King of England from 1272 to 1306, defeated Llewellyn, the Welsh leader, and began to keep the population of Wales under control by building a ring of castles. And so by the end of the 14th century, the United Kingdom had begun as a union between England and Wales, but the dragon of the Welsh flag has never been incorporated into the British flag. In 1603, James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, succeeded Elizabeth I, and in 1607 he decreed that the Scottish flag of St. Andrew, a white saltire on a blue background, be combined with the English flag. The Act of Union, passed by Parliament in 1707 during the reign of Queen Anne, exactly 100 years later, formalised the relationship between the three countries of England, Wales and Scotland. The flag of St. Patrick completes the story of how the British flag finally came into being in 1801.
And there in the name of the flag, the Union Jack or Union of Jacob, is a clue as to the origins of the word British and its integral association with the nation and its way of life.
Apart from the Union Jack and the legacy of parliamentary government, perhaps the single most identifying feature of the United Kingdom is the British royal family and the institutions associated with our King or Queen. All those institutions date back for centuries, but there is one in particular that is an integral part of the coronation ceremony held in Westminster Abbey in London. The Stone of Destiny, also known as the Stone of Scone, the Lear Foil and Jacob's Pillar, came to England in 1296, after Edward I beat the Scots at the Battle of Dunbar. But why was it considered so important? And where did it come from originally? The answers to these questions have been prized for centuries by the English-speaking peoples all over the world as part of their law and culture, until about 100 years ago. But since the First World War, a veil seems to have been drawn across their significance, and their importance has been largely set aside and forgotten. The story of the Stone of Destiny is at the heart of any explanation of all that being British means. And we're going to explore the journey made by that stone back to its origins, to remind ourselves of the way in which the history of the British gave us our laws, and defined our way of life in so many other ways. Our journey back in time starts at Edinburgh Castle, where the stone is today. It was brought here in 1996 after having been kept under the seat of the coronation chair specially made in 1300 by Edward I of England for his son's coronation in London. It's up those stairs.
Edward II was crowned just over 700 years ago, in 1306, since when the stone and the special chair made to house it have formed an integral part of every coronation ceremony,
including the last 6 of our 8 Henrys, 6 Georges, and another 4 Edwards: Queen Victoria, Queen Anne, 2 Queen Elizabeths, William III and Mary II, 2 Jameses and 2 Charleses. Every king and queen, except for Edward V and Edward VIII, and possibly the Catholic Mary Tudor, have been crowned sitting on an old piece of stone with a history that truly tells us of the foundation of the British nation. But this is the nearest I've been able to get to showing you the original stone of Scone. It's prohibited to take photographs inside. And the nearest I've been able to get to show you the original stone of Scone is this postcard.
You'll be able to judge the dimensions when we see a replica of the stone a little later.
The real stone is in one of the rooms in the keep up there. The United Kingdom began when Edward I subdued Wales and killed their leader Llewellyn in battle, and so the Welsh needed a new prince. Edward I told them that he would provide them with a Prince of Wales. Would you accept someone, he asked them, who was born in Wales, cannot speak a word of English, and has never been a traitor to his country? The Welsh agreed, and Edward held out to them, cradled in his shield, his first son born a few days earlier. Since when the sovereign's eldest son has always been crowned the Prince of Wales at Carnarvon Castle, and the Welsh have never really trusted the English ever since. Having subdued the Welsh, Edward turned his attention to the Scots. He felt that he could secure his kingdom by removing the Stone of Destiny to London. It had been here at Scone since 846 AD, nearly 500 years, and gathered for itself an authority as a coronation stone of considerable power and historical reputation. Important enough for the Scots to have asked for it back, and actually been granted their wish only 30 years later in 1328 by the new King Edward III at the Treaty of Northampton. The Scots knew exactly how important their stone was. By 1320, though, the people of London had also learnt the significance of the old stone. And although they allowed the return of the Scottish crown jewels 8 years later, they felt strongly enough about the stone to refuse permission for it to be moved from Westminster Abbey. And that, for a people against the decree of their king in those days, represented considerable strength of feeling. Edward I had taken the stone from the monastery which then occupied the site here at Scone Palace, near Perth, in central Scotland. This is Boot Hill, the site of the coronations of the Kings of Scotland, an artificially created mound which was brought in the boots of the Scottish noblemen who were swearing allegiance to the king. A little further up at the top, there is a replica. This is a replica of the Stone of Scone, and it's not made out of the original sandstone. In 1996, the Scots again asked for their stone to be returned. And on St Andrew's Day, the 30th of November, the Stone of Destiny was quietly removed from Westminster Abbey and returned amidst great celebrations north of the border. This time the strength of feeling of those who understood the significance of the stone was unheard by the government in Westminster. And whilst Scotland celebrated, throughout the rest of Britain, the event went largely unreported. But where had the stone been kept before it reached Scone? Its association with Scone dates from 846 AD, where it had been used in the coronation of all the Scottish kings since Kenneth MacAlpin, the 36th king of Dalriada, who moved it from western Scotland. The kingdom of Dalriada was established by a king from Antrim, in the northeast of Ireland, Fergus Mór MacKerch, who led his people from Ireland to the Western Isles and mainland Scotland at the end of the 5th century AD. So the stone came here to Dunstafnage. Scota was the name the Romans used for a tribe living in the north of Ireland.
The land we now call Scotland was known as Caledonia and inhabited by the Picts, a tribe who began moving into the region in about 296 AD. The Scots in Ireland had been visiting and settling in the west of Caledonia since about 360 AD, and the Western Isles became known as Scota Minor.
When Kenneth MacAlpin married a Pictish princess, unity was established between the two previously hostile tribes, and the Dalriada kingdom and dynasty, from which the British sovereigns are descended, was firmly established. The Scots' predominance and the decreasing power and influence of the Picts gave Scotland its name at a time of considerable activity in the Christian Church, and it was natural for a religious element to be a part of the ceremony of coronation. The stone had been used the same way in Ireland at the coronation of Irish kings, and Fergus Mór MacKerch had the stone brought from Ireland to Scotland so that he could be crowned in Scotland using the stone. Accordingly, it was brought in 498 AD across the short stretch of water from the Antrim coast to Iona, off the coast of Mull. The stone was then housed by a Druid community on Iona. Now our attention turns for a moment to the little Devon town of Totnes. In The History of Ancient Caledonia, by Mr. John Maclaren, published in 1879, we are told how, after the death of the Pharaoh who loved Joseph, some of the Hebrews escaped from their slavery in Egypt, wandered away through Asia Minor, and built the city of Troy. It has long been known that the Grecian Danai were Hebrew. The Trojans were also Israelites. In about 1070 BC, Brutus, a descendant of Judah, was crowned King of Britain in London after being guided by Diana to Britain after the fall of Troy. The Brutus stone in the main street in the Devon town of Totnes is said to have been the stone that Brutus brought with him, that was part of the pedestal from the Palladium in Troy. Brutus threw the stone ashore to step onto when he landed. Britain was an island which interested the early civilizations of the Mediterranean peoples because of its fertility and riches in metals. The Phoenicians would become regular visitors, and the land well known.
This is the Brutus stone that was brought from Troy.
Not to be confused with Jacob's pillow, the stone of destiny. But the episode serves to illustrate that the promise of Britain as a rich land was already known to some of the Israelite tribes, one of whom, evidently, were the Scots. The Declaration of Arbroath, written by the Scots in 1320 before the Treaty of Northampton, asks the Pope for his support in their claim to be an independent nation. And the Scots have always known exactly where they have come from.
Among other nations, our own, the Scots, have been graced with widespread renown. We have journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea, and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain, among the most savage tribes, but nowhere could we be subdued by any race, however barbarous. Thence we came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to our home in the west.
So far, our journey through time, starting from today and going back to about 500 AD, has been documented in the period of history when records of events were at least written in some form. The story of the stone in Ireland is no less well understood, but through legend, story, and archaeology. We'd reached the point where the stone was taken from here at Dunseverick Castle on the north coast of Ireland across to Iona for the coronation of Fergus Mór Mac. It had been brought to Dunseverick along the Slieve Malochra, the old road running north from Tara. In those days, Tara was the place where the kings of all Ireland dwelt and kept their court. It was the place to which any important traveller would go, or be taken, when they landed on the coast, as did a small group of travellers in 583 BC. And we'll return to the story of those travellers and the Stone of Destiny a little later. First of all, we need to go back in time, some 1,000 years or so.